The national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls continues across the country. During last week's expert hearings in Winnipeg, families continued to express concerns over a lack of communication from the inquiry. The commissioners addressed some of those concerns.
We intend to move forward with our schedule, but we're going to do it in a better way based on what we heard this week.
Pauses and resets when you have a timeline that's prescribed to you are very difficult, so I'd like to acknowledge that. And that is an issue that requires...
Joining us now from Vancouver is Lorelei Williams. Lorelei has lost a cousin and an aunt, and their cases remain unsolved. Before we hear from our panel, let's turn it over to you, Lorelei. You testified at the one and only hearing so far in Whitehorse. What's your view of the inquiry so far?
Well, I got to testify with a friend who is a survivor. Her boyfriend stabbed her and then he killed himself. So I didn't get to testify for my family or with my family. I am waiting for the Vancouver hearing for that one. But yeah, I was glad I was able to go up there. It was just a last minute thing, actually. She didn't know she could testify as a survivor, and it just so happened that I was in the APTN studio hoping that I could get to Whitehorse, watching Marianne Buller on the TV, and then she just happened to message me just randomly, and this was 1 week before the inquiry started. So I had to work quickly. I was lucky I was able to contact somebody at the inquiry, and she was able to get in there within a week to testify.
Lorelei, as someone who's, feels somewhat left in the dark here and not knowing what's going on, but someone who's also been to one of these hearings and seen it in action, are you in favor of starting the process over again?
I totally understand why the families want a reset. I get it. If I hadn't attended that inquiry, the one and only inquiry, I probably would be on the same page as them. But because I was able to attend that inquiry and testify, I got a lot of questions answered up there. I was able to mingle with the staff. I was able to talk to the commissioners. It was the moments that I was outside of the inquiry that I got to sit down with them and talk with them, and that I got to meet that ED, Michelle. She actually came up to me and said she wanted me to talk to her about my concerns and the questions that I had, and then she resigned afterwards. So that I took that pretty hard when she resigned, because I felt like I was making a connection with them, all of them. And then people started resigning, the people that I became closer to, the commissioners. So I understand why the families want a reset, because I'd be on the same page. Like, I was sitting down here in Vancouver wondering what was going on up in Whitehorse before the national inquiry started, before that first inquiry started. But I got all my answers, all my questions answered up there. So I totally understand. I'm kind of in the middle. I've been going back and forth. I feel like there is a lack of communication still, and there needs to be more transparency so the families know what's going on. Because even when I was up there, I heard some concerns on I seen some concerns on Facebook about the fact that it was in a tent. And I would have been concerned about that down here in Vancouver, but being up there, I know why it was in a tent. 10 days before the inquiry was supposed to start, it was supposed to be at a college up there, but there was an earthquake. So there was some cracks in the roof, and the community came together, and they had it in that tent. So stuff like that, like the families wouldn't know that. I got those questions answered up there. I saw why everything was happening, so I got to see it with my own eyes. I got to talk to them. So I totally understand why the families are upset.
Pam, you've been an outspoken critic of the inquiry. Some of the concerns that you've raised were raised this week again by the United Nations Committee to End the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. What are your thoughts on the way things are playing out right now?
Well, I think we have the very same problems now that we did when they launched it a year ago. There's a very small number of families who have very close connections to the people who work at the inquiry and are getting some of their questions answered. But the vast majority of families, women in prison, women that live on the streets, women that have no fixed address, they have no information at all. And it's not just the families. The NGOs and experts and people who are supposed to be testifying aren't getting any information either. And the United Nations took very particular note of the fact and said that the inquiry was not accountable, wasn't transparent, and it wasn't providing even basic support for the families. So last week's expert panel hearings in Winnipeg, the vast majority of set aside for the families were empty. They didn't provide transportation, didn't even provide food. I mean, if we're talking about very basic level issues. So the fact that even families are divided, some are supporting the inquiry as is, and some are calling for a reset. The fact that this inquiry has created this division is a really strong indicator that we need to rethink this going forward. And remember, a reset doesn't mean everything gets erased and it starts over brand new. All of the testimony that's been held to date could be preserved. Meetings and information and logistics that have been gathered to date can be preserved. It's about a matter of doing better for the lost women and girls and focusing on making a change for them.
Niigaan, we're short on time here, but I want to get you in your thoughts on where things are at right now, reset, no reset.
There's three very serious problems with the inquiry that are ongoing. The first is that there's a real issue where that not including the families, even from the get-go. And so, the issue here in Winnipeg, the hearings in Winnipeg, families weren't included till the third day, considered till the third day, and real basic stuff like Pam mentioned. They have a real problem with communications, and it seems as if their communications are always not actually dealing with the inquiry. They're almost like they're not talking. So there's now an issue of whether the report is even done before the hearings begin, and that's a real problem. And the third is that there is a real structural issue here, and that they've got 2 years. I don't see them to be able to perform 3 different sets of hearings all going on at different times. I know how an inquiry report goes, and this one is really looking like in a lot of danger.